Well, you know, is there a way out for stupid people? you know, well, like I was writing a couple of days ago about um, I don't remember. Maybe it was like an email correspondence that I copied the bit to Facebook, but I remember this Japanese Zen master of the last century who published a book, and the title of the book was like an ongoing, what was it, like something like admitting my own stupidity that lasts, something like this. Do you understand what I mean? And so we are definitely, being a practitioner, to me at least, you know, you just find this completely ignorant and foolish and naive and stupid and embarrassing stuff from your own mind. Kind of makes you blush, for a moment. You at moments you might be worried that, oh shit, I hope that nobody else hears the stuff that goes on in my mind. And I'm sure we all had this for a moment, because we all have, total nonsense and totally bonkers stuff going on in our heads. That's what the delusion is. That's what I was talking about, the skewedness of perception. That's what it is, But because we have the knowledge that, we only need to be aware of it. We only need to welcome our stupidity, our ignorance. That's what liberates us. And that's, having those glimpses of the natural state, when those glimpses heap up, we become that stupidity, foolishness, ignorance, it becomes less and less and less. And we gain gain clarity, we gain confidence. We are less confused as the weeks and months and years go by. We should be anyway, but not all people are. But I think that, culturally, and this is something that I've written and talked quite a bit over the years, that there's a lot of unhealthy and unuseful and harmful things in Dharma scene. Like, for example, poor pedagogics, poor teaching skills that teachers have. There's some traditions, like in Zen tradition, they practice too much, and when they talk in abstract terms. So the whole instructions and the path becomes like a difficult to understand. How can you, well, if you don't understand the information, how can you come to real understanding? You can't. And on the other hand, in many traditions, it's the opposite way. They just talk and talk and talk and don't practice. And what they talk, it's vague shit. So again, you have the problem that the teachings, instructions are not transmitted properly, effectively, for people to practice, for people to apply them. And it's all over the place. Well, I personally, as a teacher, I highly appreciate and endorse the guidelines of the so-called pragmatic Dharma. There's this article by Vincent Horn. I think the article is actually copied in full in What's Next, in my second book, but it's also in my blog. Vincent gave me a permission to do that. But I think these guidelines, basic guidelines of pragmatic Dharma, are really, really essential. The whole thing has to make sense. It has to make sense. Because how can you learn anything if it doesn't make sense, if you don't understand what you're doing? And this is something that we can learn from secular education. You know, kids learn how to count, they learn mathematics, they learn how to read and write, and you know, they learn all this stuff. But in Dharma, people are not learning much, and because they aren't, they are not practicing correctly. So you might have total fools, total idiots, who have practiced 20, 30, 40 years, who are just parroting stuff that they heard. They have no first-hand experience, and they are still as lost as they were 3 decades ago. And that is very, very unfortunate. And what happens is that I think that if one advances authentically, has authentic insight, all these fixed ideas and fundamentalistic beliefs, they disappear. At least they loosen rather than get more rigid. But sometimes when you talk with practitioners who have been at it for decades, they are very rigid and have very fundamentalistic views. And they have very hard time even, you know, listening and considering other kinds of truths, other kinds of perspectives. So if you meet that when somebody has practiced for a long time, you can be sure that there is something very wrong, some basic mistakes in that person's practice, probably in that person's teacher's presentation. So unfortunately, some people remain fools. Maybe it even gets worse over the years. You know, what happens with the way how samsaric mind works is that when you invest your time and energy and your money into something, it becomes an investment, right? So, you know, you want to, if you don't have insight, if you don't come to know yourself, then, you know, it just adds to your confusion. And this is how Dharma is for many practitioners, that, you know, they are scared to admit that they might have wasted their time, energy, and money for years and decades. They don't want to hear that, you know, they can't admit because it's too painful for them. And it's very, very unfortunate. This is why, you know, I was blowing my trumpet and beating my drum on many forums for years, but I stopped doing it because people, you know, people are so invested with their stuff. Some people hurt me, but those are very few. But it's the same thing in the history of mankind. You know, there is somebody like Jesus, for example, beating the drum, you know, wake up, you know, you can, you know, saying useful things, but then there are the Pharisees who did what Pharisees do. But this is also a question of merit, which means readiness. If you're not ready, if it doesn't hurt bad enough, if it doesn't hurt enough, then you want to stay in your, you know, if it's tolerable, you can stay. But if it gets too painful, like a needle piercing your skin and your muscle and your all the way to the bone, when it gets painful enough, you want out, no matter what. No matter what beliefs, rigid beliefs and ideas you have, you just want out. And that's when Dharma practice becomes authentic. Then you have enough merit or readiness. This is what Shakyamuni was saying about 4 noble truths. I think those 4 can be summed up in 2 points. First, you have to acknowledge that you suffer, that you're confused, and then you can dig yourself out. But if you don't suffer, you can't dig yourself out because you don't acknowledge that you suffer. So, like I said in the session hour ago, that samsara is actually a direct means to nirvana. But if you don't acknowledge your samsara, your dukkha, there is no nirvana either. Isn't that interesting? But if I look at the world today, over the last 100 years, different yogic teachings, Dharma teachings, meditation teachings from the East have spread around the world. But how many are really practicing? Even if you have the highest teachings and best teachings of Sutra, Tantra, and Dzogchen spread all over the globe, but if people aren't ready for it, if they don't suffer, not much use. Because when you suffer, you also become honest. You don't bullshit yourself and others. You don't pretend that you practice something and that you're making progress. No pretension.
Sounds a bit unfortunate for people who are not ready to acknowledge their suffering.
What is that? I missed the beginning.
I mean, that sounds, to me, it sounds a bit unfortunate for people who are not ready to acknowledge their suffering.
Yeah. But this is nothing new. This is how it always was, and this is how it always will be. That, even though all sentient beings have Buddha nature, there are much more samsaric beings than there are mahasiddhas. Although there are many, many, many mahasiddhas. But, if we look at the world population at the moment, it's 7-8 billion? But there's a handful of mahasiddhas alive at the moment. Literally a handful. Maybe a dozen at tops. Let's include those that I'm not aware of. But dozen out of 7-8 billion, it's not that many. So people are jumping or getting out of the transmigration of the 6 realms very slowly. It's happening, but it's very slowly. And that's just how it is. That's the reality of it.
And with not readiness to accept your suffering, probably it doesn't seem to be binary. I mean, you could acknowledge some parts of your suffering, and I could struggle to acknowledge the others, just like turning my head off it all constantly.
Well, that's true. That's true, of course. But the way how I was speaking about it, and the way how I think about it is that we are Vajrayana or Tantric Buddhists, and Vajrayana has the slogan that Buddhahood in this life. Which is kind of a cool and sexy title, Buddhahood in this life. But yeah, for most, I came to think of, I have Dudjom Lingpa's statue on my altar, home altar. And Dudjom Lingpa was a Tibetan master who lived a little more than 100 years ago in Tibet. And he and 13 of his disciples attained full enlightenment, rainbow body, full rainbow body. 13 disciples. That's a significant number. 13 students of a single master. So in his case and his students' case, and from the point of view of his pedagogics, he was a big success. And I'm sure he had many more students who made relative progress. And then continued, didn't achieve Buddhahood in that life, but then perhaps continued practice in some pure land, or took rebirth again as a human being and then continued practice and perhaps became Buddhas. So of course there is relative progress as well, but I'm kind of looking at it in a more serious way always, that I take that claim that you can attain Buddhahood in this life very seriously, always have. But there certainly is also relative progress that helps. It's just the practice continues in future lives, in whatever form they may be. I usually don't go over time, but I realized that we are now 25 minutes over time. So I apologize for wasting your time for extra 25 and for the first 2 hours. Thank you for a lovely weekend together. Hope I see you again on spring retreat. And hopefully we get back to the normal in-person retreats soon. Thank you also for your donations. And have a nice day. Practice well.
Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you a lot.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye.